Hi, I'm Ella Beach. I'm the illustrator for All the World's a Stage, Peter Pan, published by Magic Cat and out on September the 11th, 2025. This is a little video taking you behind the stage and the making of this book. I always love reading and hearing about the process of other illustrators, so I wanted to do the same for this book. This is part one of 3 videos where I'm going to talk you through a little bit about the process, particularly around the world building and making sketches for this book. I discovered through making this video that I won't work in a figure of 8 way. Keep watching to find out about that. But in this first video, I sort of talk to you about the different formats that I work in when I'm making my sketches, and I'm getting from first sketches to sort of final sketches, including sketchbooks, layout paper and Procreate. And then in the next few videos, I'll be talking you through the making of a spread from my first thumbnails to the final artwork. And then I'm going to talk you through one that didn't go so well, because I always love hearing about the process of how illustrators work. So I hope these videos are enjoyable for you. On with the video. For this video, I wanted to talk through, vaguely try and talk about my process for Peter Pan. I think probably what I do is I circle around a lot, or maybe I work in a figure of 8, let's say. So it's not always logical, but there's probably a logic to it somewhere. But so I've just laid out here an attempt to show you the beginning of my project. In my last post I showed this a bit. These are some of my first sketches I did for the characters. These were the ones that I was sort of happier with, the sort of faces and the sort of characterizations a bit more. These were the pirates. I'd been drawing them in my sketchbook, and this was trying to sort of get them down on a piece of paper that I could then stick on the wall and use for reference. This was my first little doodle here, was me playing around with creating the costume for Peter Pan. In the end, I decided to put Wendy in pyjamas because I didn't want her to be too girly. I wanted her to feel that she was part of the gang, and I didn't want her to feel different from the rest, so I put her in pyjamas in the end. But Peter, I had this idea that I wanted to use paint sticks. So these are paint pens I use quite a lot in my observational sketching. And I suddenly, when I was on the train, I remember thinking about, I was reading the book, and as I've talked about, I was underlining bits. And this is a description of Peter. He was a lovely boy, clad in skeleton leaves and the juices that ooze out of the trees. So I was sort of thinking about leaves and his costume being leafy. And that was when I had the idea of using a paint stick to do his costume, which here's one I made earlier, which I did on the book. So this is the cover, and it's also got pencil marks as well, but I had fun making the artwork using the paint stick. So I've already talked about the characterization. There's also the sort of world building. There was a lot of sort of internet searching for getting the vibes of the Darlings' house. I kind of wanted it to be quite bohemian. Yes, so there was definitely a certain amount of trying to find bedrooms that made me feel inspired by a sort of bohemian feel. I wanted to have sort of maybe curtains hanging over the bed. I kind of wanted it to feel drapey and, I don't know, bohemian. So then you can see there's lots of pirate references. We'll skip over those for now. I wanted to sort of say that what I tend to work in is a mixture of, I like to work in these moleskin, sort of very thin paper sketchbooks. They're not unlike the layout paper that I'll talk about in a bit, which I like to work in. I think it just, particularly at the beginning of a project, it helps me feel like it's low stakes. So I remember making these, sort of feeling pretty intimidated about how I was going to do Peter's bedroom, but you can see I've got the drapes over the bed and things. And then what I tend to use the book for also is if I'm struggling to draw a character, because for me the drawing is really important for the final piece, so I've got big heads and things like that, I might go into this sketchbook and do some sketching in here rather than, and then what I'll do is I'll scan it and put it in to a larger sketch. So you'll see in here there's various, sometimes if I'm struggling I'll come into this sketchbook and I'll do the sketch that I'm the most happy with. So that's what I mean about that sort of figure of 8 way of working. Sometimes this helps me feel a bit freer. That's the end of Peter Pan there. Sometimes it's doing my sketches. Sometimes it's doing my sketches in layout paper. So I just wanted to quickly talk about layout paper. I really love this layout paper. I tend to work in this A4. I need to sort of sign up to a subscription for this because I get through so much. So I like to work in this. This is the one I like. It's 45 GSM. Daleroni. It's very thin, and what it means is that if I've done a sketch, let's say, and I really like the way that I've done Wendy's head, but I want to change her limbs, I can sketch her face out again without keeping it the way I want it to look, but then I can change her position, and it's sort of really easy. But tracing paper wouldn't work for me because it's too opaque, no, too see-through, too transparent. And I wouldn't be able to sort of visualise my drawing as I'm doing it. Whereas because this is opaque, it gives me a sense of doing a fresh drawing at the same time as doing a new, basing it on what I was working on. So that is massively important for me. I worked as a designer for a long time, and we often would do that with thumbnails in-house to sort of think things through. So it probably comes from that. So I like to work in both A4 and A3 layout paper. I just wanted to also mention that one of the ways I work is on the iPad. Again, this tends to be if I'm struggling with a scene and I want to be able to move things around a lot, or I just want to add some quick tone in, I might come into Procreate. So you can see various different scenes I've just drawn up. Sometimes it'll be for a final sketch. Yes, this was probably because I wanted to really move these characters around, and sometimes it can be easier to do that. Or again, this one I did it to add the tones in quickly. So yeah, the iPad is another way, another sketchbook for me.